So I wanted to do a brief introduction to our book, Abolition of Man, as we begin reading this week. And I want you guys to spend the next 2 weeks or so on chapter 1. But today I just wanted to give you a very brief introduction to our book and to the background. I'm going to share my screen. Let me pull this up. Okay. With C.S. Lewis and his book, Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis, as many of you probably know, he was a convert to Christianity from atheism. He also fought in World War I as a teenager, and he was there, I think, on his 18th or 19th birthday. He was in the war, and he did during this time witness his best friend dying in the war, and he also himself was injured during the war, and so he was sent back home. So he did experience the trials and difficulties that occur in war. And then he is going to experience World War II, and he is not able to enlist in the war for various reasons, but he is bothered by what's happening and what he's seeing. But during World War II, some of the things that he does are to go around and speak and to give talks on the radio, to give different lectures. He writes books. So he's doing a lot of different things to try to engage with people during this time. Abolition of Man has 3 chapters, and these were actually lectures that he gave in 1943. He was invited by King's College to come and give these talks. And so the audience that he is speaking to would have largely been students and professors, varying religious backgrounds, including some atheists. And so that's important to realize who he's writing this book to. So as I said, it was 3 lectures, and they were eventually transcribed into writing, and that became the book. And so that's the background for it. As I mentioned, Britain and the world were in the midst of World War II when he wrote this book. And I'm going to read something. There's a book called After Humanity by Michael Ward, which is a kind of a commentary and a guide to the book Abolition of Man. This just recently came out by Word on Fire Press. But one of the things he says in this book that I just want to read really quickly, as far as the context for our book Abolition of Man, he says that, I'm going to quote from this. This is on page 5 of this book, After Humanity. He says, Michael Ward says, "It is February 1943. The United Kingdom is still at war after 3.5 years. The Battle of Britain has been narrowly won, and the Blitz has somehow been endured, but the blackout and food rationing remain in force, and the V-2 rockets have yet to rain down on Easter England. D-Day, with the Allied invasion of Normandy, is more than a year away. Victory in Japan is a distant dream. Life goes on in the universities, but is much depleted and disrupted. C.S. Lewis has been distracted from his academic pursuits by service with the Oxford branch of the local defense volunteers, which is called the Home Guard, as Churchill preferred to call them. And he's traveling about the country, and he's talking to the various men of the Royal Air Force. And he says that when the outbreak of hostilities loomed back in 1939, Lewis had found himself deeply depressed. He recalled memories of the Great War that had haunted his dreams for years. And then he goes on to say that, but though the prospect of a second great conflict initially pushed Lewis towards despair, the arrival of the war had the effect of awakening C.S. Lewis's fighting spirit. It says that he was too old to reprise the active service he had seen during the First World War, when he had been a teenage officer on the Western Front, but he now felt he could and should engage in combat with some of the philosophical and religious issues that this new conflagration had forced to the forefront of people's attention. And so during this time, he wrote The Problem of Pain, another popular book of C.S. Lewis. And then he also was speaking over the BBC airways, doing different talks. He also wrote one of his most popular books called The Screwtape Letters in 1942. And so C.S. Lewis saw that behind the World War II, behind this war, was an even bigger war, the war of the unchanging moral and spiritual conflict that faces people of every culture in every place in every generation. And so Michael Ward says the intellectual threats to freedom that Lewis considered worthy of his attention were not confined to the regimes of the Axis powers led by Hitler and Mussolini. They were also present within democratic societies, such as the United Kingdom. And so then what Lewis is going to see as one large threat that existed at his time was going to be skepticism, or not skepticism, subjectivism. And subjectivism is then going to lead him to write the book of Abolition of Man, his worries and concerns about this false philosophy. And so Abolition of Man is going to be in 1943. It's going to be a lecture, as I said, he gives. And he's going to give 3 different lectures, and that's the 3 different chapters of the book about this. And so we will venture into this book week by week. But one of the things that is going to be at the heart of C.S. Lewis's thinking on this is a couple questions. One, are we simply our intellect? Is all that we know based on data and reason? The problem with this is the danger of thinking this way is that you fall into scientism or materialism, because all we do is basically use our reason, and we just use facts and data to tell us about the world. But then he says, on the other extreme, are we simply our emotions? Do we base what we know and what we perceive? Do we base what we know only on what we perceive and what we sense and what we experience? The danger of this is subjectivism and relativism. Emotions and perceptions do not always correlate with reality. Without reason, we have no foundation to rightly order our emotions. Both our intellect is important and our emotions and desires are important, but we have to have the proper order and relationship of those, because that's what makes us human. But there's this tendency to focus on one or the other, to only focus on science and the material things and our reason versus only focusing on our perceptions and experiences and emotions. Lewis will essentially hold that both views are dehumanizing concepts of the human being, of who we are, because we're not merely machines. We're not merely bodies. We're not merely atoms floating in the world. If we only had our intellect and our reason, and that's all we were, is this consciousness, that'd make us these pure spirits. But that's not who we are. If all we are our emotions and our desires, then that would make us just merely animals. But we're not merely animals. We're not merely spirits. We're not machines. As human beings, we're body and soul. And our body and soul components are inseparable. That's who we are as human beings. Our reason and emotions must be integrated with each other. But what exists? What means do we have to ensure that our reason and our emotions are rightly ordered? This is going to be the big question. How do we keep our reason under control and rightly ordered? How do we keep our emotions rightly ordered? Our reason and our emotions need each other for stability and for order. But we can deceive ourselves if all we do is rely on one without the other, if we rely on one to the exclusion of the other. But sometimes, even if we use our reason, we could still be deceived. If all we rely on are our emotions, we can be deceived. We could see the world in an illusory way. And so C.S. Lewis will say, what grounds us in reality and in truth? What is it that keeps our reason and emotions properly integrated, that helps us remain ordered and to act rightly ordered? And so this grounding feature C.S. Lewis is going to describe as our chests. He's going to use the analogy of a body, the head, the stomach, and the chest. The head is going to be like a reason. The stomach is going to be equivalent to like the emotions. And then our chest, in his analogy, is going to be this stabilizing, grounding feature that helps our reason and our emotion be integrated properly. And in some places, you may even see the chest like being our heart. But this is used as an analogy in the book Abolition of Man. And so he's going to talk about this a lot. And so he's going to eventually talk about the problem he sees that the world is making, quote, men without chests. And so what he's going to talk about is this danger of subjectivism, creating men without chests, that our chests become atrophied, this grounding feature that helps our reason and emotions be properly integrated and ordered is atrophied. It's going away. It's being minimized. It's being ignored. And so we're creating men without this order, without these chests, okay? And so Lewis will say that within our chest, this analogy of our chest, there exists what he is going to refer to as the Tao, or the way. And he's going to use this a lot throughout the book. What he is referring to when he mentions the Tao, or sometimes he'll use the term, quote, the way, but he more frequently calls it the Tao. He's referring to something that's objective and something that's universal, something that's discovered and not invented. And so for Lewis, the Tao, he's using this term not to single out Eastern religion. He's using it to emphasize that the point of his book, Abolition of Man, is that he's trying to make an argument that is not merely Christian. So he stays away from using what Christians are more familiar with as the term the natural moral law. That is what he means by the Tao. But he doesn't want to use the term the natural moral law because it has this Christian sense to it. And so he does not want to automatically make the audience turn away from his argument because they object to Christianity. He wanted to try to use a more kind of neutral term in a way where it wouldn't make his audience immediately think, oh, he's just talking about Christians. He wanted people to see that the argument he is trying to make in the book Abolition of Man is an argument for something that's universal, that it does not matter what religious view you hold. Even sometimes atheists could agree with this idea of the Tao that he is arguing for, that there is this objective universal truth, that there are these moral truths that are discovered and not invented. And so that's going to be where he's going to move with his argument, is trying to show that there is this push for subjectivism, but the counter to that is promoting the truth of the Tao, of this natural moral law, this objective universal moral code that we discover but do not invent. And I'm not going to give away the book too much. I just did want to clarify that as you start to see him using the term the Tao, this is what he's meaning. And he one of the things that he will reference, particularly in the appendix, but even subtly in the book, is Romans chapter 2. And we know this as Christians, that St. Paul says that even those Gentiles can know the law that God wrote on men's hearts. And this is referring to the natural moral law. This is the sense that there are some objective truths that we can know just because we're human beings created by God. And because of who we are, there are these things that are going to be objectively and universally true in regards to the moral law and how we should act. And so the Tao is the term that Lewis is using in this book to refer to what Paul is talking about in Romans chapter 2. Although Lewis is going to stay away from specific Christian references, primarily because his book is not to make a Christian argument solely. It's not solely about arguing for Christianity. He's trying to show his audience that no matter if you're Christian or not, there is this foundational truth that we can agree on across cultures and across time, across religions. And in the appendix, we'll talk about this more later, but in the appendix, Lewis is also even going to show references about how there are some objective, universal moral truths that are agreed upon by people of all different cultures and religions. So he's going to put, for example, talking about, I'm just going to open it up randomly to that appendix area, like that there is this objective, universal moral law that we have a duty to honor our parents. And so he's going to take quotes from Hinduism, from the Babylonian culture, from the Egyptian culture, from the Jewish culture, from the Greek culture, among others, and then the Christian culture. And he's going to show that these different cultures and religions all acknowledge that there is this duty to our parents. And that's in the appendix. And you can see that, but that's the point of he's trying to draw out and highlight to his audience that this alternative option to subjectivism is this objective universal moral truth that he's going to argue exists. The other thing I want to introduce you to with chapter 1 is one of the things you're going to read about pretty quickly is something that's called the Green Book. So in real life, C.S. Lewis was sent a book, and this book was going to be used in educating children at the upper level schools. And so he had this book. It was going to be something he was asked to review. And so when he received this book, it was alarming to him. And so he doesn't give the name of the book in Abolition of Man, but historically, the scholars and everyone knows the real life book that he was referring to. But in the book, he gives it this ambiguous title because his goal is not to specifically attack the individual authors. He wants to address the ideas that are in the book. And so I think he felt like if he told you the name of the book or told you the authors in real life, that may draw away from the argument he's trying to make here. But we do know in reality who these people were. So the Green Book was actually a book called The Control of Language by Alec King and Martin Kelly. And this was actually it was a book on grammar. It was teaching upper level education on grammar is what it was about. And so it's a grammar book. And then Lewis is going to be upset by it because he sees that the book is actually trying to sneak in subjectivism through this grammar book. So he's going to refer to the Green Book. And then the ideas in this Green Book that these authors wrote about in real life were influenced by another real life figure who was well known to C.S. Lewis, and his name was I.A. Richards. And I.A. Richards was a subjectivist and well known to Lewis, and Lewis and Richards knew each other very well. And again, C.S. Lewis does not want to call out Richards specifically in the book because he does not want this book to be about a debate with Richards. He wants it to be about the ideas and the concepts that are being promoted. So he stays away from naming names, but people do know that this is who was on the mind of C.S. Lewis in the book Abolition of Man. I.A. Richards, for example, here's a quote from one of his writings, I.A. Richards' writings, that helps you to see the subjectivism that he promotes. So he says, I.A. Richards says, "We are accustomed to say that a picture is beautiful instead of saying that it causes an experience in us which is valuable in certain ways. We continually talk as though things possess qualities when we ought to say that they cause effects in us of one kind or another," end quote. So this is a very subjectivist mentality that there are no things that are truly beautiful. It's just we approve of it or we like it, and therefore we say it's beautiful. There's not qualities that it possesses that make it beautiful. It's just our own preferences or values. This will make more sense as you read chapter 1, because there's an example of a waterfall that C.S. Lewis is going to highlight, and you'll see this starting to come out, this idea that there are not objective truths about things. It's just our opinions and our preferences. And so this is going to upset C.S. Lewis tremendously because he sees this subjectivism becoming more and more prevalent in the culture. It's being promoted in education, in the media, and everywhere he looks, this is starting to permeate society. And so he's very concerned by that. And that leads him to write this book, Abolition of Man. And when he got the Green Book, the Control of Language, when he got that to review it, he saw this intimately in there and was very worried. He says that the Green Book was smuggling subjectivism into our education system, and he was worried. But the goal of Abolition of Man is not concerned solely with the education of our children. What he wants us to see is that it's concerned with wisdom in general, how it is that all of us are acquiring knowledge and understanding truth and goodness, how we are gaining wisdom. And so it's worried about not only how we acquire knowledge, but also how we pass it on to people. And so it's wisdom as a whole that he's worried about. Subjectivism impacts all of us, the entire culture. It's not only our children we need to be worried about, it's also ourselves. He wants us to try to recognize where we too are being influenced by subjectivism in our culture today. And many are going to say that Abolition of Man, it was written in 1943, but many will say it is very prophetic, because if we read this book, we're going to see how so much of what C.S. Lewis was concerned about has come true, and how much of it we're experiencing in our world today. It's a very prophetic book about the dangers of subjectivism and how prevalent it has become, and the dangers we are seeing today everywhere around us with it. Now, there's the book After Humanity that I mentioned earlier. It was written by Michael Ward, and I want to end this little initial summary with a quote from him that is really powerful, that helps to kind of highlight some of the points that C.S. Lewis is trying to make in this book, Abolition of Man. Michael Ward says, and this is on page 42 in After Humanity, he says, quote, "The pervasive, almost ubiquitous acceptance of various kinds of emotivism and subjectivism in modern Western culture means there can be no persuasion. That is to say, rational argument leading to a freely adopted change of mind. Rather, as belief in objective value evaporates and the public square is evacuated of practical reason, what passes for moral discourse increasingly resembles a war zone. The question of truth, as such, is relegated to a second or third order issue. The real question is one of power, and thus we arrive at our post-truth world." And by post-truth world, he means denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief, end quote. I think this really articulates and highlights some of the problems that C.S. Lewis was predicting with subjectivism. That if subjectivism continues to be prevalent and influential, it is going to take away our ability to have rational arguments and rational discourse with people. Because as you'll see, subjectivism says that truth, what is true, is based on my own values and preferences, that I get to determine what is right and wrong based on what I prefer and what I value. And this can vary from person to person. It rejects that there's any objectivity, that there's no objective dimension to reality. There's no objective truth. There's no objective morality. And if this continues to become prevalent, it is going to make it almost impossible to have debates and to have dialogue with people. And so he says it's going to end up becoming a war zone, because we will not be able to have rational discourse. It's just going to be power. Who's stronger? Who has more power to be able to enforce their ideas and their values? So truth is not going to be a priority. It's not going to, truth is like, okay, well, truth, whatever. The real question is, who can have the power and the influence? And so he says that's kind of the problem that C.S. Lewis is seeing with subjectivism, and that we're going to create a world where objective facts aren't as influential as emotion, and that it's going to lead to, subjectivism is going to lead to emotion shaping public opinion more than objective facts. To me, this is a really powerful quote, because it really does highlight a lot of what we're seeing today. But I'm going to leave you with that quote, and I want you to continue to reflect on it as you continue to read chapter 1, as well as the other chapters of our book. So that's a little brief intro to chapter 1. As you read, post any type of questions or anything in the comment boxes. If you have like, hey, I don't understand something, let me know in our Facebook page. And hopefully you had a chance to watch the Zoom discussion that we had on the essay that C.S. Lewis did on the poison of subjectivism, because I think in that Zoom meeting, we had a lot of conversations and dialogue of talking about subjectivism in more detail. So I think that would be really a good thing to watch if you haven't seen it yet. I'm also going to post some different videos that you can watch that hopefully will be helpful as you continue to read and trying to understand what C.S. Lewis is saying. I'm going to post a few little brief videos and then some longer videos with deeper discussion. So definitely, I would encourage you to read all of those. Along the way, I'm going to post different articles and other resources that I think will help you hopefully dive more into the book and help the book to be more fruitful. So be looking out for those. But thank you again for watching this brief thing. And again, don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions or anything's confusing, just let me know. So we're going to read chapter 1 of the next 2 weeks, and then I will talk to you again soon. Take care.